No, come around this way. Stand on this side, better. How do I put Okay. Good Tag. Can you hear me? Welcome to the fourth week of the community initiative preparing for the Yom Noraim and also the annual Koilo Menachem Beis HaMikdash evening. We want to thank Herschel Herbst and family for sponsoring in part in honor of his mother's 98th birthday on Hey Av. Should have lange gesunde Jahren. And if anyone still wants to sponsor, please speak to Rabbi Shlomo Baba. Also, a big thank you to Mati Rabin and Rabbi Shlomo Baba for putting together tonight. And round of applause. Without any further ado, Al Pido Rav, the Rebbe to have a siyum during the 9 days. I want to call up Rabbi Benji Simons to make a siyum.
Shavot Tov. Tonight we're doing a siyum on Masechta Tainis. I had the zchus to learn Masechta Tainis with the Mesivta high school boys. The end of the Masechta talks about the 5 different calamities that happened to our forefathers we know on Tisha B'Av, and ends off the assignment with the 6 positive events that happened on Tu B'Av. It's a beautiful idea by Tzaddik HaKohen of Lublin, in that the events that happened on Tisha B'Av were actually masakim, were fixed in different ways on Tu B'Av. So, for example, we say on Tisha B'Av, we read on Eicha Haisa Kalmana that Yerushalayim, the Jewish people, were like a widow, and we know Tu B'Av is like a tikkun of that. There was a time of engagements, marriages where husband and wife, of course, the Jewish people and Hashem were able to come together. Perhaps to take it very quickly a little bit deeper, we see actually the 5 different events that happened on Tisha B'Av all had a tikkun on Tu B'Av. So, for example, we find on Tisha B'Av it says, Nigdav essentially Konstalaretz will decree upon our forefathers that they would no longer be able to enter into the land of Eretz Yisrael, and that was fixed to some capacity because on Tu B'Av it was realized by the final year before they were going into Eretz Yisrael that they were no longer going to die and able to come into Eretz Yisrael. Also, for example, we know on Tisha B'Av we know the first and second temple were destroyed, and the first temple was destroyed as a result of idolatry, and we know in Tu B'Av was one of the times where there was a lack of idolatry to the fact that the centuries that Yeravim ben Navat set up to have pagan worship was removed. They were able to have central service only in the southern kingdom in Jerusalem. All we find in the second temple was destroyed because of sinas chinam, because of disunity, and we know on Tu B'Av there were various events of intermarriage between the different tribes, as well as after Pelegish Begiva with the tribe of Benjamin. We also have the concept of Beitar being captured, and so many years later, on Tu B'Av, the dead of Beitar were able to be buried. And finally, we have the concept of Nechras Sha'ir, where the city was plowed over. There'll be no more further growth in Yerushalayim, and that was also masakin in the day of Tu B'Av, where they were no longer able to cut the wood for the pyre because the sun did not have the intensity to dry it out, and therefore the forests of Jerusalem were able to continue to grow. The end of the Masechta just finishes off with a symbolic marriage between us and Hashem. I was going to read through the last few lines, and we'll finish off with the Hadran and a Kaddish D'Rabbanan bit afterwards. In the future, Hashem will make a circle for the righteous individuals, and he will sit amongst them just like a chasna and kala is done in the marriage began Eden. The best way to be a person will be able to show. There'll be an aspect of clarity pointing to Hashem with his finger. Will be on that day. This is our God. Behold, our God. This is what we hope for. And he will save us. This is Hashem that we have hope for. That we are rejoicing and being happy in his salvation. Hadlach Shashbrock and Vatzlach Masechta Tainis. Hadlach Masech Science, Father Allah, Title Masech Title Allah, Lines of Menach, Masech Science, Lines of Menon, Mamadem, and Lawasi. It's a Panacha, now Seno, Traskum, Sinba, Mazel, say Manolo Maba, Henan Papa Ram, Papa Nachum, Papa Achim, Papa Abibar, Papa Rafim, Papa Rach, Papa Surka, Papa, Adar, Papa Darba, Papa, Hemna, Zak, video, Amcha Israel, Niakon Nachum says, Amcha Israel, Claudia Schmachelin, Charles Luchma, Meva, to Mesach, Kilam Hidi, Ili, Kaham, and Pracha, Laman, Leva, Follow, Vachab, Pracha, Kibam Kisani, Barchan, and Krecha, Amen, Amen, Salved. Madam Nachlach, and Leva, Seno, Santo Chinam, Base Midrash, Santo Chinam, Base Krat, Alton Mashkim, Almashkim, the Serb, and Mashkim, the Dvarm Talim. On the Meva, made them on the Mabel Kamasach, and Helena Kamasach, on the Rat, name Rat, on Rat, and Kaylam, and Rat, and Vershach, Shamat, Lahim, Turn, and Lashach, Joe, remember Lex, and Many Atachbach. Some Flacha, and I like Shiv, Shazan, Simon, Saxon Times, Kent, and Haskell, Saxon Farm, Machem, Simon, Lumoy, Lamish, Laset, Lakan, Kadibre, Samu, Saxon, Baba, Swast, Lam of a Ram, Samit Hamim, Yamai, Lizari, Thomas, Messiah, and P. Zarim, Zari, Adoilam. This guy be Slacha, San Khoisak, Shakha, Tishmar, Lacha, Vaxazi, Sacha, Hibi, Yerbo Yamacha, by Sifo, Lachash, Chaim, Ericam, Minavas, Moil, Oish, Recovered, and not as Amita Navarra, Hasamai, Vashalim. Iskara, Shmei Rabbi, Ramadok with Melach Machos, Sebastian Bekar, Bekar, Beshichay, the Chaye, Chamet, the Chayt Chal Beis Sabah. God, I was looking for Ramein. Yeah, hey, Shmei Rabbi, Mavarach, my Israel, Fishrak, Fishbar, Tom, Safety, Davis, Shmei Shabrichum, Laylam, Kabakasabi, Shots from the Kawazam, Ramal, Ramein. I saw Baba, Ramal, Ramal, Kadavitam, with a Hermal, Commandos, Kimaraisa. They may deep calls up a study, Hello, Shamaram, Khizrak, and Khan, and Zaricha. If we come in, 100 Shmai, Ramein. Yeah, hey, Shalom Mishmai, the Chayt of Lamb, Kaisab, Ramein. I Shalom, Yashalom, Kaisab, Ramein.
Yash Koyach and Mazel Tov. I forgot to mention a very important thank you, a big thank you to Dan Goldhirsch for not just this week, but all the weeks of the Community Initiative Hachana program. And Mati, we thanked him before. So Yash Koyach. Now I'd like to call up Rabbi Lesches, and I want to thank everyone for the technical support. Yagaitu Mutsasi Tamin. And without any further ado, Rabbi Lesches.
Good luck, everybody. Again, I reiterate, sorry about the technicalities. I wasn't aware that the whole system has changed. Might have been easier just to bring my own projector from home. Now, before we begin the actual PowerPoint part of it, and if I could actually ask that the lights at least be a little bit on, because I need to be able to see my own notes. I actually wanted to explain, initially what the Shiur is going to be about. As you see on the program, on the PR, it just had Hilchos Beis HaBechira. And if I'm going to be very honest, the reason is because when I was asked to present, I wasn't 100% sure what I would be speaking about. I very much wanted to present something new, and I do try from year to year to present something new. And I came across a particular topic which I find very interesting and a bit off the beaten path, connected to the Beis HaMikdash, and I was hoping to get that in place in order to get to present that tonight. Unfortunately, between everything that's happened between now and then, I haven't been able to finish that. We started that, so Oid Chazon L'Moed, the best will be we'll see for real when Mashiach comes. But logistics aside, I actually thought when I was in Eretz Yisrael, I actually decided I wanted to just return to more basic, more central inyanim because of a number of experiences that I had in Eretz Yisrael, which I'd like to begin with, just sharing some of my trip to Eretz Yisrael before we go to the slideshow. It's very hooked up. It's good. It's good. Yeah. So when I was in Eretz Yisrael, along with 20 or so other Rabbanim and then a couple of Rebbitzins, I felt that when you look back at the trip, there was a couple of things that were recurring. It wasn't just like a one-time experience. A certain idea or a certain theme came up on one day and then in a different form on a different day and so on and so forth. And the one I'd like to share tonight, which I think is very appropriate, connected to Shabbos Chazon this time of the year, is the following. The first night that we were in Eretz Yisrael, we met with the head of World Mizrachi, whose name is Rav Doron Perez. And he unfortunately had two children who were very much impacted by the war in Gaza. One of his children, Danny, was for many, many months, they didn't know exactly, they knew that he was taken to Gaza, they didn't know his whereabouts. Eventually, they discovered the worst news possible, that he was actually killed in combat on Simchas Torah the day shortly after. And his Hashem Yinkum Dama in his body is still in Gaza, and they're waiting and hoping for the day that they're going to be able to bring him to Kfuras Yisrael. Their other son, Yonatan, was also injured in battle. He was hurt in his foot. He very much wanted to go back to combat duty. However, in Israel, there's a law that once someone in the family has fallen in battle, they don't allow other family members to go back to combat duty. He very much wanted to. That's a whole story for itself. It was actually interesting that there was 2 days later, so our whole group went to the army base in Nahal Oz, and that's exactly where his two children were battling on Simchas Torah, less than 50 yards from each other. They didn't even know that they were right next to each other. He shared to us many things that night when we met with him, a lot of things, but one of the things that struck me is a certain mifza, I guess the name of Lubavitcher would give it, a certain project that the family decided to do Le'ili Nishmas, their son, Danny. And this is known as Bayit B'chol Bayit. How did this begin? So the mother, Rav Doron's wife, whose name is Shelley, read a Facebook post. There was a woman by the name of Batsheva Sadan who had a son, and the son was also fighting in Gaza. And she writes that one time her son told her that he has off for the day and he's coming to visit the family. But before he comes home, he has a very important stop over that he wants to take care of something before he goes home. So his mother asked him, what could be more important than visiting your own family? What on earth are you doing before you come home? So this son, this soldier, this Chayal responded, I'm going first to a store in order to buy a picture of the Beis HaMikdash in order to hang up in our house. And the mother was flabbergasted. She says, that's more important. You come home, have a good meal, do your laundry, give me your laundry. You're fine, you'll go a couple hours later, you'll buy yourself a picture of the Beis HaMikdash. What's the rush? He said that in every single home that I've been into in Gaza during my combat duty, without exception, every single home has a picture of the Har Bayis, has a picture of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Our enemies are very, very devoted to their cause. They know exactly what their cause is. Ad kedei kach that in every single home, very prominently displayed without exception, you have a picture of the Temple Mount of the Har Bayis. And we're the true owners. We're the Jewish people, and the Beis HaMikdash is what the aim is, what the goal is. And from our enemies we learn, and if this is what they do by us, so kol sheken v'kal v'chomer, we should have that in our home. So I decided that the first time I get off, the very first thing I'm doing before I get home is to go find myself a picture of the Beis HaMikdash to hang up in my house. And this generated into this whole project, which I don't think is available here, but in Eretz Yisrael it's called Bayit B'chol Bayit, a house in every house. But I'm not suggesting that someone has to dafka go ahead and do it in such a way, but that idea that the Beis HaMikdash is uppermost in our minds. 2 days later, Wednesday, we were in Gaza, in the Gaza envelope, as it's called. We were in the regional center in Eshkol, and the Rav Schatz, who's the head of civilian security, his name is Ilan Isaacson. He was speaking to us about the situation, about the Matzav in Eretz Yisrael. And towards the end, we were asking him questions. And someone asked him a question we heard all the time. What would you say about, all the battles or the wars that's going on in Gaza, but what about the innocent civilians? Okay, if you're asked such a question, what would you answer? I think some of us would, it's a necessary thing. Maybe some of us would start quoting a Gemara in Masechta Gittin about trying to take away the snake without smashing the barrel. Anyways, he just stared the questioner down and he said, as some of you said, there's no such thing as an innocent civilian. And some of us were taken aback. How do you know out of 2 million people thereabouts that there's no such thing as a civilian, innocent civilian? And this was his response. His response was that in every single home that the soldiers have gone to, without exception, you have all this paraphernalia of Hamas, Temple Mount, but Hamas, things which are connected with a terrorist organization, every single home. So it's true that for political purpose, perhaps even military purposes, the IDF is going to distinguish between militants and civilians, but as far as he's concerned, there is no such thing. It was actually fascinating to hear this a number of times from different Chayalim in Eretz Yisrael, that is the experience without exception, every single home. So, of course, this is from the Tzara Klippa. For Tzara Kedusha, what's meaningful to us is that we also, if this is our goal, the Beis HaMikdash should be uppermost in our minds. The next day, we went to the Knesset, and not that I'm such a big expert on Israeli politics, but we met a Chaver Knesset. His name was Ohad Tal, and we spoke with him very interesting about issues of Jewish identity. And he was trying to bring out a certain point, and he asked us, does anyone know, perhaps anyone here knows, how do the Arabs refer to this war that's taking place right now? What's the name of the war? It's called the Al-Aqsa Flood. Why is it called the Al-Aqsa Flood? The Al-Aqsa is the Arabic for what we call the Temple Mount, and they're trying to flood in order to occupy the Har Bayis. What is the Israeli name for this war? Anyone know? Good, it's called Milchemet Charvot Barzel. Does anybody know the reason for that name? So you've all done very well. That's the correct answer. Nobody knows. Nobody knows the reason for that name. I'm taking it from the Chaver Knesset. And his point was, in this war, the Arabs have a name which is very well-defined cause, which is obviously the antithesis of what we're fighting for. But then we have a name. What are we fighting for? It was an interesting contrast. Right after then, we went to, there's something which is called, I think from memory, the Ol HaGvura. And there you have parents, bereaved parents whose children fell in battle. And they've decided to make a bit of a shiur, a bit of a campaign, because they feel that the losses in their family should not be in vain, and they want that the government should be strong, no ceasefires. So we went over there, and there was arranged that one of the bereaved mothers would speak with us. And one of the things she said, which was like the polar opposite, she said that when she would speak to her son and ask her, and other people would ask her son in combat, where are you right now? He would answer, Paneinu labayit. Our faces to the Beis HaMikdash. That was where he was. At every single point in battle, that's how he felt. Paneinu labayit, our faces to the Beis HaMikdash. And these were things I wasn't looking to connect with it, just one after the other, where you see very much this side. Sometimes you learn from those who are on the other team. But the importance, we learn a lot about the Beis HaMikdash and about really connecting with the Beis HaMikdash, how especially important that is. And I'd like to connect that with a medrash in Eicha. Some of us might be learning it this coming week. A medrash in Eicha speaks about 3 incidents. That there was a Melamed who lived in Migdal, which I think is north of Tveria. And the medrash says, this is what the medrash says, that every Friday he would travel through a tunnel to the Beis HaMikdash and spend a couple of hours there preparing his shiurim that he would have for the coming week. And he would return home, and then he would teach the tinoikas, the children. And in similar fashion, there was a gabe or a shamish in a shul who would prepare the candles for Shabbos, for the week. And he would travel again through a tunnel, and he would come back and then prepare the candles in shul. And then there was a group of women who would prepare challah for Shabbos. They would prepare dough. And before they did hafrashas challah, they went through tunnels to the Beis HaMikdash, and then they came back and did the hafrashas challah, got the challah ready. And the obvious question is, tunnels from north of Tveria to the Har Beis, we're not aware of such a thing. What is the meaning of this, that there are these tunnels that you go back and forth? So the Medrash doesn't explain if it's literal or figurative. We know that very often Agadata is not literal, it's figurative, it's there with a message. But I saw a very interesting biur, which comes from the Maharal. The Maharal speaks about in other contexts as well, as we think about what a tunnel is. The difference between a tunnel and another pathway. If we want to travel somewhere and we're traveling along a road above the ground, so roads which are above the ground, first of all, are not very protected. You're exposed to the elements, you're exposed to the enemy, you're exposed in all varieties of ways. Furthermore, the road is going to follow the geology. It's going to follow the ground. There's a mountain, it's going to go up a mountain. Valley's got to go down a valley. It's affected by everything that's happening around it. What's a tunnel? A tunnel is very protected, and it can go straight through. It obviously takes a lot of work to build, but it goes straight through. And the Maharal explains that tunnel, the tunnel he's speaking about a different medrash, but the tunnel that it speaks about is a direct path. And if we connect it to the medrash Eicha, maybe the pshat is that a yid, when he feels that he needs to do anything, you want to learn Torah, you want to teach Torah, you want to prepare candles in the shul, you want to do hafrashas challah, you have a tunnel. The idea of a tunnel is that you'd go directly to the Beis HaMikdash, to the place you want to be, without any obstacles, without any impediments, without anything in the way at all, and it's protected. And of course, tunnels is a very meaningful thing at this time. We know that our enemies are right now using that, but that's something that we can use for the good, that idea of completely unobstructed, and we can go straight through. And when I shared this idea in the past, there's actually an interesting connection to Menashe. The king Menashe was a very wicked king. And without going through his whole life, he did these ridiculous things. He killed his grandfather, Yeshaya Novi. He killed one of his children, his child to Avodah Zarah. And he killed many people, rampant Avodah Zarah. Hashem eventually has enough. And to make a long story short, he's eventually taken in captivity to Babylon. And there he is in Bavel. And according to Medrash and Gemara, the Bavliim wanted to torture him. So not just going to kill him. They put him in this cauldron with boiling hot water, and they're boiling him to death. And then he finally cries out to Hashem for help. Till then, he's ignoring Hashem. Right now, it's a moment of truth. He cries out to Hashem. When he cried out to Hashem, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that the Malachim stood in the way. And the Malachim said, such a Rasha, we're not allowing his tefillah through. What did Hashem do? He burrowed a tunnel under the Kisei HaKavod in order that the tefillahs of Menashe could reach. So one simple question is, if you're just imagining from here to the heavens, how do you get from here to the heavens? We don't normally think of a tunnel. We might think of a plane, a bridge. What do you mean a tunnel? A tunnel to the heavens. So the Maharal explains when he's speaking about this idea, the same point, that the idea is that, yes, Menashe did a lot of terrible things, but a tunnel represents the part of the Yid's Neshama which has this unobstructed connection to Hashem. It's something which is completely connected to Hashem. And it's a way that a Yid can connect despite whatever he's done, all the obstacles, all the things that get in the way. The tunnel is something which Hashem creates in order to connect with the Kisei HaKavod. So this is a little bit about the experiences that we had in Eretz Yisrael, about that yearning, that desire to connect with the Beis HaMikdash. And talking about tunnels, before we actually get into the theme of this year, I actually wanted to share something that I actually discovered on Friday, and I hope this is going to work. Yep. Okay, here we have the layout of the Beis HaMikdash. Many people will be familiar. This is the Ezras Noshim. This is the Azara. And I'd like to focus on a room which probably doesn't get a lot of focus, and that is there's a room known as the Lesches HaParva, or sometimes Lesches Beis HaParva, the Chamber of Parva. What was this room? We know that there was two functions. One was the actual room, one was above the room. The room itself was the room in which they took the hides of the korbanos, the skins of the korbanos. Once the korban was shechted, the hides were taken to this room, and this is where they were preserved, where the tanning process began. And above this room, you had a mikveh, which the Kohen Gadol used to use on Yom Kippur. So obviously, you look in different pictures, there's going to be all sorts of artists' impressions of it. This is showing you actually on Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol would go, he would go up the steps to the top, he would go to the mikveh, and there was no door there. We don't even know if there were walls for that matter. And the Kohanim would hold up linen garments in order to preserve the dignity of the Kohen Gadol, that nobody should see him while he's using the mikveh. The question is, parva, what does that mean? Lesches HaParva. So the Gemara in Yuma tells us a very fascinating thing. My parva, what is a parva? Amagusha. Anyone who knows Gemara, Aramaic, knows Amagusha means a sorcerer, a magician. Magician, sorcerer, what does that have to do with the Beis HaMikdash? There's all sorts of pirushim. One pirush, for example, as I mentioned, that there was a mikveh on the top. To have a mikveh on top of that building and to be halachically kosher was such a feat without going into it. They didn't have the technology we have these days. And it was coming from a spring that it looked to the people as if a magician had made it. That's one of the biurim. But the Rosh, and it's not just the Rosh, other Rishonim also bring from Rabbeinu Chananel, and it's also brought in the Sefer Aruch, from Reb Nosson Bala Aruch. He says that there was a machashef echad, there was a certain magician. We don't know if he was Jewish or not, could very well be he wasn't even Jewish. That one time he decided, Ola B'daita, he had this idea, he wants to see the Avodah of Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur, at the time that he's offering up the Ketores. So what did he do? He made tunnels from Yerushalayim to the Har Beis. Okay, that's not that close, and they didn't have the technology that we have these days. Where in Yerushalayim, you'd sort of presume that he had a house, or he had his own living quarters, or he got a property, and he tunneled from Yerushalayim to Har Beis. They found him. In other words, he tunneled all the way from the Yerushalayim, all the way to the Har Beis, under the Beis HaParva, and that's where they found him. He was pretty close to getting to the Kodesh Kodashim. They killed him. His name was Parva. That's why they call this room Lesches HaParva. According to this approach, Parva was his actual name, and the Gemara means that this was Parva the magician. So a question which the Achronim ask is, we know V'Shem Rishon Yerkav, the name of a wicked person must rot. Why are we giving, we're talking about a room in the Beis HaMikdash. A room in the Beis HaMikdash, we're going to give it with the name of a sorcerer, which is connected to Avodah Zarah. We don't even know he's Jewish. What kind of name is it to give this room? So I was looking into this on Friday, and I saw two biurim. One is more of a classical explanation, is sometimes you have to make a point. We have to take a stand. We have to publicize. In Australia, we call it naim and shame. Right? So you got to publicize things in order that no one else should try to emulate this. So we have other examples. One of the most famous gates in the Beis Midrash is called the Sha'ar Nikanor. The Gemara in Yuma tells us why it's called Sha'ar Nikanor. Everyone knows the story. But the Rosh in Talmud gives us a second reason why it's called the Sha'ar Nikanor. The Rosh says that in the days of the battles between the Chashmonaim and the Greeks, so there was a Greek general by the name of Nicanor, which shouldn't be surprising because Nicanor at origin is a Greek name and just many Jews had that name. And the Jews killed him. And they were so excited that they killed this like arch enemy of the Jewish people, like the head of Hamas last week. And they took him to the Beis Hamikdash. They wanted to publicly thank Hashem and make a public spectacle out of it. And he says that they cut off his hands and his feet and strung it up next to the Sha'ar Nikanor in the Beis Hamikdash. And that's, he says, why it's called the name Sha'ar Nikanor. I find it fascinating. He gives an explanation, given that the Gemara gives a different explanation, but that's the explanation he gives. So sometimes we need to make a point. So we call it Beis HaParva. However, I saw in 3 Svarim, one of them from memory is Siach Yitzchak, a fascinating biur, and they all say the same biur. The reason why we call this room the Beis HaParva is because there's something to learn from this magician, and what there is to learn from this magician is his shtoikakus, his desire, his yearning. What is his interest? You imagine you're a magician. Out of all the things you could do, what do you want to do? You want to see the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. And therefore, we call this room the Lesches Beis HaParva to tell every single Yid that there's something there to emulate about him, that you should also, in theory, want to be such a person who's so desirous of seeing what's going on in the Kodesh Kodashim that you're willing to burrow a tunnel in order to see this. When I saw this beer, I was reminded of a sikha, which is actually just, I think it's Matas Maseh. The Rebbe speaks about it in connection with the 3 weeks, but it's connected to Beis HaBechira. The Rebbe speaks about it in the 3 weeks because it's connected to the Beis HaMikdash, about what the room of the Kohen Gadol. We know the Gemara in Yoma says that the Shtei Lishkas Ho LeKohen Gadol, the Kohen Gadol had 2 chambers in the Beis HaMikdash. One of them was the Lishkas Parhedrin, and Rashi says that was the room that he used to sleep in. It was like a personal room. And then you had the Lishkas Aftinas, Lishkas Beis Aftinas, which was where he learned he trained himself how to do the Avodah on Yom Kippur. The Lishkas Beis Aftinas had that name because the family that prepared the Ketores was the Aftinas, and he used to go to that room to learn how to do the Ketores. The Gemara in Yoma says we don't know. The Gemara says one of these rooms was to the north of the Azara, one of them was to the south of the Azara. We don't know which is which, but the Rambam Beis Yerushalmi positions these rooms for us. When it comes to the Beis Haftinas, the Rambam says that the room was near the Sha'ar HaMayim. Sorry, went through that a bit fast. Over there, that's the Sha'ar HaMayim, so the room would have been near there. And then you have the Lishkas Parhedrin, the Rambam positions to the north of the Azara. There's different conceptions about that little corner of the Azara. This layout, which is based on the Tosfos Yom Tov, we don't know exactly where it is, but it would be somewhere over here, perhaps in this general area. This is a famous model, which there are videos about how Rav Lavnuni, who made this model, came to the Rebbe, showed him. But over here, you see, in this corner, you see, let's actually go a bit closer. In this corner, you see a couple of rooms, and that's going to be the Lishkas Parhedrin. That's Lishkas Hagaz, excuse me, and there is a Lishkas Parhedrin. What does Parhedrin mean? It's not a very common Hebrew word. For those who are wondering why the Kohen Gadol needs a place to sleep, it's because the Gemara says in Yuma that for 7 days before Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol did not stay at home. He came to the Beis Hamikdash and he stayed there for 7 days. He learned another interesting thing. The Gemara says that during those 7 days, they showed him this is a cow, this is a sheep, this is a goat. I always find that fascinating. Maybe it was a Derhoib and a mensch and he didn't know what these things were. I don't know. Why the name Lishkas Parhedrin, which is what I want to get to. So the Gemara says Parhedrin is an officer appointed for 1 year. And the Lishkas Parhedrin was rebuilt every single year towards the end of the Beis Sheni. What is the reason for that? Every single year there was a new Kohen Gadol, and he would rebuild the room to perpetuate his name. Why is there a new Kohen Gadol? So I'm sure anyone who has learned the history or taught the history of this Tkufa knows that the Kohen Gadol was someone who bribed the Romans to be the Kohen Gadol. Sometimes he wasn't even a Kohen. And the Romans just gave the Kahuna Gedola to whoever gave the highest bid. And he would be Kohen Gadol until Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur he would go into the Kodesh Kodashim and he wouldn't make it out alive because B'chaim Misib De Shamayim, and he would be killed. So every year there's a new Kohen Gadol. Now he wants that one day anyone who comes to Beis Hamikdash should remember him, wants something to memorialize him. So he would arrange that the existing Lesches Parhedrin should be demolished and replaced with another version, which is going to be connected with him. When I teach this in the yeshiva, the Bachram asked me, what's the point? Did he not know that someone else is going to come along and do the same thing? I don't know. That's what the Gemara says, and that's why we call it Lesches Parhedrin. In the Sikha, the Rebbe asks a question. We know that everything, we want to perpetuate good things, not bad things. We're talking about names of rooms in the Beis Hamikdash. Why are we calling it Lesches Parhedrin? The Rebbe gives two answers. A more basic answer and then a deeper answer. I actually want to focus tonight just on the more basic answer because it ties into everything we've spoken about. And that is that the Rebbe says that here we want to bring out the Tarikheit von Hareingehen in Kodesh Kodashim, how precious and dear it is to go into the Kodesh Kodashim, even one time. And even if it's connected with our Toitzof and Hepech HaChaim, this means what the Rebbe is saying is we're talking about a Kohen Gadol, who we know is essentially a Rasha. If someone's buying the Kohuna Gedola and he's not even necessarily a Kohen. And what's his aspiration? He wants to go into the Kodesh Kodashim, and he knows this is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience, like literally. Okay, he's not coming out alive. And yet, what does he want to do with his life? He wants to go into the Kodesh Kodashim. And the Rebbe says that's the positive in that name, Lesches Parhedrin, is to tell us that here we have Kohanim Gedolim who are Rishoim, but look at their riches. What do you see in their wickedness? Their wickedness is that they want to go into the Kodesh Kodashim when they're not really worthy. So, based on all of this, the theme of the PowerPoint that I'd like to do is focus a little bit. I have spoken about in the past many years ago, but it doesn't hurt, I hope, from time to time to revisit things, is to talk a little bit, the shittas, not too much in depth, but at least in a superficial way, where exactly is the Makim Kodesh Kodashim? Where exactly on the Har Beis is the place of the Kodesh Kodashim? Where is this holiest place in the world? And I hope that when everyone goes home, you can have a little bit of an introspection or reflection and think about what can I do in my own life to show that I have this kind of yearning to the Beis Hamikdash. Now, before I get into it, I just want to also point out that I didn't review this PowerPoint fully well knowing that I would have my notes available to me, but they are not available to me due to these technicalities. So hopefully I'll remember everything, but if you have any questions, I might, maybe if there's something I don't remember, I might just flag it to share at the end. So there's a Mishnah Masechta Midas, source of bottom Masechta Tamid, speaks about the Har Beis. The Har Beis is Chamesh Esrei Amma al Chamesh Esrei Amma. The Har Beis is 500 Amis by 500. What I say? Sorry, Chamesh Me'os Amma. Thank you. Chamesh Me'os Amma, Chamesh Me'os Amma. 500. You see without the notes. 500 Amis by 500 Amis is the size of the Har Beis, and everyone knows 500 by 500 is a square, and that's how I have it on the diagram. Okay, what about the actual Azara? When I say the Azara, I'm talking about just this area here, not the Ezras Noshim, is 135 Amis wide. It is 187 Amis long. Where exactly is it situated? That the greatest amount of Har HaBayis space is to the south. That if you come to the Har HaBayis, if you come to the Temple Mount, the part which was the greatest open area was to the south. What is the reason for that? Mefarshim give two reasons. The first is that Yerushalayim was initially, that was the most populous direction, meaning most people lived to the south of Yerushalayim. It didn't wind up that way, but that's how it started. Some of you who have gone to Yerushalayim will know that to the south of the Har Beis these days, you've got a whole tourist archaeological sort of business over there. I don't mean businesses in money business, but I mean as a situation known as Ir David. And although when it comes to archaeology, everything at the end of the day is theories, but very, very strong evidence that Ir David is where you had the first Beis Hamikdash, the Yerushalayim of the first Beis Hamikdash. So it's to the south of the Har Beis, and it's completely outside of what we call the Old City Walls. The Old City Walls is to the west, and this is to the south. So Yerushalayim, if we accept that, Yerushalayim, the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, is completely to the south of the Har Beis, is actually initially even smaller than the HaBechira, and to walk up actually from that direction is very, very grand to walk up to the Beis HaMikdash. So that is in this direction over here. Eventually, already in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, especially towards the end, under Hurdus, Herod, Yerushalayim expands to the west. The west is not going to be a fitting direction to come to the Beis HaMikdash because it's not appropriate to walk behind the Kodesh Kodashim. So rather, they came from the south. So the Mefarshim explained that because most people are going to be coming through these gates over here, that is why we needed to have the greatest space in order for the crowds to come through. If you think about an office building where you're going to have the biggest lobby at the main entrance, and you have smaller lobbies by the other entrances. This is, some of you might know, that was known as the Holy Land model. I think now it's in the Israel Museum in Yerushalayim. A second reason why this is going to be the biggest area, which it is related, but when we come into the Beis HaMikdash, so they will come through here, and the halacha is that whenever you have a choice, you have to turn right. We'll talk about that soon. And basically, the idea is that as people walk into the HaBechira, gradually people are using different entrances to walk into the actual Beis HaMikdash. So as you go around and around, you need less and less space. Now, the Mishnah continues saying that the second greatest space was to the east. And here we have a machlokes. When we say to the east, do we mean from the east of the HaBechira to the east of the Ezras Nashim? Or do we mean from the east of the HaBechira to the end of the Ezras Nashim? Because we know that the Ezras Nashim did not have the Kedusha of the Azara. It was holier than the HaBechira, less holy than the Azara. So the Lesches Shleima on this Mishnah is of the opinion that when we say that Sheni, the second biggest area, was to the east, we're talking about excluding the Ezras Nashim. The Tosfos Yom Tov argues, and the Tosfos Yom Tov says, we speak about the second biggest area, we're talking about from here to this wall. That would mean that the space between the Ezras Nashim and the HaBechira was pretty small. Okay, what happened here? That's still there, but I lost my computer. Is it still on power? I have power, I don't know why. No, it's powering up again. Yeah, it's right. Am I going to have to, No, we'll just log in again. Don't know what happened there. It's all good.
So there's some folks to say from the trip. Quite an interesting episode.
This is the perfect time to fill up your plates.
People are asking if there more for the soccer and still watching.
So, what should I move this back? Move it back. Let me move the whole thing back.
Yeah, but that's just for sure.
Oh, great, we just lost power.
This way? Like that or that way? There.
Thank you, Rabbi Lowenthal. Okay, so then the reason why, I already started saying the reason why this side is going to be bigger than this side is in order, when a person has a choice, we know Kalpinis, Shatapina should be Letzada Yamin, to the right side. So therefore, when a person has a choice, he's coming to the Beis Hamikdash, at his first place he can choose which way to go. He makes a right, and therefore most people are going to come to the Beis Hamikdash, and they're actually going to come through this gate, through the Sha'ar Nikanor, into the Beis Hamikdash. The third largest section was to the north. The north wasn't used that much by the regular people, perhaps, more the Kohanim. Over here was a specifically busy room, which I've spoken about in the past, as Beis Hamikdash, the Lesches Hagazis, where the Sanhedrin sat, and other gates here as well. And the smallest amount of space, just skipping a bit forward, is behind the Kodesh Kodashim. And the reason that's the smallest space is because we don't actually want people to loiter there. We don't want people to be there. We want people to show their respect, and when they enter the Beis Hamikdash, to enter from other sides. Now, I spoke a little bit about this as part of the Josephus slideshow that I spoke about 2 years ago, but to expand on it a little bit more, because there we just spoke about the part as it was related to Josephus. And that is that we have a very significant problem with that Mishnah. And that is that if you go to the HaBechira today, if we look at all the walls, we have walls, which is pretty much accepted. I haven't seen anyone who says otherwise, that all the walls are at least from the tkufa at least from the ends of Bayis Sheni. For those who just want to get their bearings, that's the Kaisel Plaza. And this entire western wall is intact to some degree. For some of that, you have to go under the ground. You can go to Eretz Yisrael, you have these tours through the tunnel tours, the Minarot HaKotel. You have to the south, the archaeological park over here is dug down, and the wall is intact. And similarly on the eastern side, the entire way, at the very bottom, there are layers of walls, which is accepted to be from the time of the Beis Hamikdash. If we look at the dimensions of the wall, it doesn't really match what we know about 500 amas by 500 amas, because the eastern wall is 470 meters, south is 280, west is 485. By the way, you see it's not a perfect rectangle either. North is 313 meters. And if we look at the Shiur, choose whichever Shiur you want. We're going to choose Reb Chaim No, which is an amma is 48 centimeters. And that would mean that 500 amas is 240 meters. That doesn't match any of these walls. And for the sake of argument, you can take whatever Shiur you want, but we're not looking at a square. The Mishnah says, Chamesh me'es amma, Chamesh me'es amma, 500 by 500, and that's a square, and this is not a square. How exactly are we going to resolve this? We discussed this, as I said 2 years ago, at length. I'm not going to go into this part at length, but Josephus basically describes in 3 of his books, although in Yosifon it's a little bit different than the other 2, that when Hurdas came up with his decision to rebuild the second Beis Hamikdash, he writes clearly that one of the things that he chose to do is to expand the entire HaBechira. And to expand the HaBechira involved a lot of things. He had to do a lot of elevating different areas in order to make a flat surface. Now, I'm going to skip the video just due to time, and unless you dafka want to see it, but you do, okay. Okay, we'll get where's my speaker? Just give me a second to get the sounds to the right place. It should be in the right place. Where's the sound? Okay, we'll try our luck.
Towards the end of the Second Temple period, in the 18th year of his reign, Herod, king of Judah, gathers the people of Jerusalem and surprises with a dramatic announcement. Herod states his intention to raise the old temple built on Mount Moriah by the returnees from Babylon and to build a new temple in its place, the most sacred and beautiful of our time. The Jews are appalled. The thought that this tyrant who has murdered thousands of people would tamper with their holy site merely for the sake of self-aggrandizement terrifies them. They're afraid that Herod will destroy the old temple without completing the construction of the new one, leaving them without a place to serve God, neither the old nor the new. The people are frantic. What will happen? Josephus recounts that Herod reassured the Jews by promising to prepare all the building materials in advance before even one stone was removed from the existing temple. According to the Talmud, the story involves a secret agreement between Herod and a Jewish sage by the name of Baba ben Muta. In a private meeting, Herod expresses regret for his past violence against the Jews and agrees to atone by building a glorious new temple that will spread its light around the world. He extinguished the light of the world. Let him now go and kindle the light of the world. This agreement opens a historic window of opportunity. The great builder of Caesarea, Masada, Herodian, and countless other projects joins forces with the Jewish people. Together, they will turn the small, modest temple in Jerusalem into a large, magnificent house of worship that will leave a deep imprint on humanity. The work begins with a tremendous burst of activity. Herod gathers thousands of carts and beasts of burden, cranes, wooden pulley blocks, engineering devices, and quarrying tools of all kinds. 10,000 Jewish workers, along with the top engineers in the whole world, tackle the job. Hundreds of priests take care of building the sacred areas. But one problem still threatens to thwart the entire project: Mount Moriah. The site designated for the new temple is narrow and steep. The area available for construction is limited and certainly not suitable for the monumental compounds that Herod envisioned. Herod's solution is bold and ambitious. Build huge walls that would support a giant plaza and then construct the temple in the center.
Okay, I hope you all have your hearing still. And okay, really the point I wanted to focus in that video was the last one. The Gemara doesn't doesn't say anything one way or the other about it, but Josephus, clearly says that Herod expanded the area of the Har Beis. Now let's think about that expansion. Would it have the Kedusha of the Har Beis? And there's two reasons to be pretty certain not. The Gemara in Sanhedrin discusses what happens if the Jews ever want to expand the Kedusha, the space of the Azara, or the space of Yerushalayim. And we know that the space of the Azara has a certain Kedusha. If I want to expand it, how am I going to expand the Kedusha of the Azara? So there's a whole process, which the Gemara tells us is that you need to have two Kohanim. In the case of the Azara, they have to be carrying from the Menachos, which are Kodshe Kodshim, together with a Jewish king, a halachic king, a Navi, the entire Sanhedrin, and they go on a procession and they expand the area of the Azara. Similarly, the Gemara says if they want to expand the area of Yerushalayim, which is what you're seeing in the photo, in the image here, is you take one of the two Lachmei Toida, and they, same kind of procession expands. They go on this procession, and wherever they walk, they bring with it the Kedusha of Yerushalayim. Now, in the times when Hordus was expanding the Har Beis, it's questionable whether we had a halachic king. Hordus would not have been a halachic king. Even more importantly, there was certainly no Navi anymore. There's no prophet anymore. That meant that in the time of Hordus, it's impossible to expand the Kedusha of the Azara or Yerushalayim. Furthermore, there's a machlekes in the Achronim. The Gemara in Sanhedrin speaks about Azara and it speaks about the Yerushalayim. It doesn't talk about the Har Beis. We know the Har Beis is holier than Yerushalayim. It's less holy than the Azara. Can you expand that as well? And that is something which the Gemara doesn't say. And there are opinions who say that if the Gemara neglected to mention it, you actually cannot expand that Kedusha. So this would explain possibly, and this I believe is the accepted explanation, is on the one hand, the Mishnah says that the Har Beis is 500 amas by 500 amas. Rabbi wrote the Mishnah 200-300 years after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, but nevertheless, the Makom Kodesh, the holy part of the Har Beis, is only 500 amas by 500 amas. And that's not a contradiction to say that the physical space was expanded, and when you visit it physically, it looked like much bigger. But the actual holy place was 500 by 500. Now, that has another very big significance, which makes it much more difficult to pinpoint the place of the Kodesh Kodashim. Because if Hurdas expanded the Har Beis, which way did he expand it? Did he expand to the south, to the north, to the east, to the west, to all? There are those who want to say that the eastern wall is most likely not to have moved. There are those who say the exact opposite. The western wall might be original. And we can talk about theories, but we don't know exactly. So I just wanted to go through three main shittas about where the place of the Kodesh Kodashim is. And the shittas I'm talking about are not ones I found in books of archaeologists who also have their opinions. And if anyone wants, you could probably go online and find maybe 10, 15 different opinions, but focus on three which seem to have some sort of basis in Torah and in Halacha. I might mention, by the way, that we know we're going to speak about the Kodesh Kodashim, the Avnei Shia, in the first Beis Hamikdash. Obviously, there was the actual Aron was in the first Beis Hamikdash. In the second Beis Hamikdash, we didn't have the Aron. What's interesting is we know there was no Aron, there was no Kruvim. Everyone here knows the famous Gemara Masechta Gittin, which speaks about Titus. When Titus HaRasha walked into the Kodesh Kodashim, what did he see? He saw Hakruvim Mu'urim Zeh B'Zeh. They were hugging each other. It's more in Yuman and Beis, I think. So in other places, they were hugging each other. The question is, how could the Kruvim be hugging each other if there was no Aron and Kruvim at all in the second Beis Hamikdash? So the Maharsha, there might be other answers, but the Maharsha learns that in addition to the Kruvim that you had on the top of the Aron, you also had Kruvim that were carved into the walls of the Kodesh Kodashim. And the Kruvim that Titus saw that were hugging each other were not the ones which were on top of the Kodesh, on top of the Aron, which didn't exist in the second Beis Hamikdash, in the Kodesh Kodashim, but rather he saw the ones in the wall. Now, before we get into the three shittas, let's just discuss a little bit more. I know some of you might be familiar with what we're seeing over here. Here we have what's known as the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is that these days, unfortunately for us, the Arabs go there to pray, and this is the mosque in which they pray. If they're going to pray, they actually do it over there. As far as they're concerned, this is from a vantage point of prayer. This dome with a rock is actually less important to them. That's not a place that they go to pray. It's rather some sort of shrine. So to make it understandable to us, but lahavdil, there are some places we go to daven, and then there are some places, if we're there, we don't daven there, but we just say Tehillim. It's a special place. So that are those two places. Now, this is, if you go inside, obviously it'd be very problematic for a Yid to go inside. Part of the question would be, where's the Makom Kodesh of the Har HaBeis? I do know that there are from groups who have made certain estimations, hasharis, about where it is safe to go. And I think the shitta that we have from the Rebbe is that we should not go anywhere on the Har HaBeis because out of a suffix where the holy place was. Now, this is a shrine which was built in around the year 691. The peak is 744 meters above sea level. That's the peak today. Now, we know that the place of the Kodesh Kodashim was not necessarily the peak. We'll talk about that soon. But if you go to the Har HaBeis today, this is the peak of the mountain. It was built by a caliph in the year 691, and I don't have the notes now, so I can't tell you the name. But this story is where we see that Jews are sometimes have this idea of Marsayich u'Machrivayich Memechet Seir. The Jews are sometimes their own worst enemy. Everyone here has heard that the Har HaBeis is the third holiest place for the Muslims. Why is it the third holiest place? Because in the Quran, apparently, there's some sort of story about Muhammad who went to the heavens on some sort of horse, on a fiery horse, one night. He went to the heavens, he returned. It's a very holy experience. In the Quran, it doesn't say where that is. This caliph had some sort of religious figure who was a Jewish apostate. And the Jewish apostate told him that the Har HaBeis is where that story happened. And that is where the shrine was built in order to memorialize that. And ever since then, it became the third holiest place for the Muslims. I actually saw someone made an interesting point. I saw this last week, is that the Vatican, you have only the Christians there. You go to Medina, it's only the Arabs. Dafka, where the Jews are, everyone wants a hand in it. Anyways, so this is the current, so to speak, the focal point of the mountain. If you look closely at the rock, you see something fascinating. You can see that it's chipped. There's chipping into the rock. How did that happen? So over the centuries, we know there was the First Crusade, the Second Crusade, the Third Crusade. We know that already at the end of Rashi's lifetime, you had the First Crusades, Christians who decided that it's not appropriate that Eretz Yisrael should be in the hands of infidels, and they went up in order to conquer Eretz Yisrael. Of course, we know that the Jews were collateral damage. It's a story for itself. As you might have heard, the hardest part of getting to the top of the summit of any mountain is when you get there, was weiter, you have to come back down. It's the hardest part. So when the Crusaders came to Yerushalayim and they were initially victorious, and all of a sudden reality struck that now they're victorious, we have to go back home, we have to get up our nasa, we have to deal with our wife who hasn't seen us for months and is going to want to know why we ran away, and our family, and we need money. Someone came up with this brilliant idea. I'm going to chip away a little bit of this rock, and I'm going to take it back with me to Europe, and I'll find some very religious rich man, a Christian, who's going to pay top dollar for it, and I've set for life. And this idea caught on, and that's why it's chipped over there, and some of the rock is, I guess, somewhere in Europe. I don't know if anyone knows where it is these days, but that is the history of that. This rock is massive. The dimensions are 17 and a half meters long, 13 meters wide. It's surrounded by that thing. According to the Shitta, the Radvaz, as well as the Rav, the Bartanura, this is a place of the Kodesh Kodashim. There is a tshuva from the Radvaz where he speaks about it, and he gives he's a bit of a shakavataric, gives a couple of proofs, and deals with a couple of questions. He brings, first of all, the Gemara in Yuma, Tafim Gimel Amud Aleph, that says that Even Hoysa Sham Mimos Nevim Rishonim, there was a rock in the Kodesh Kodashim from the days of the earliest prophets. Ushia Hoysa Nikris, it was called the foundation rock. So it was 3 finger breadths above the ground. Now, we know that the Gemara says Mimos Hanavim. However, the Gemara in Yuma goes on to clarify that what the Mishnah is not trying to say it's only that rock appeared in the times of Nevi'im. It means it goes back all the way to the times of Nevi'im and beyond, and it brings a brayso Shemimenu Hushtas Ha'olam. This is the rock from which the Even HaShia was, from which the world was founded. That's why it's called Even HaShia. He also brings some Pirkei to Rabbi Lezer. I don't remember if he brings it or it's just a support for his shitta. As Pirkei to Rabbi Lezer, in fact, be a bit inspiring if you learn this. Rabbi Shmuel says, also look at his name, Rabbi Shmuel, that there are 15 things that the Bnei Yishmael are going to do ba'achris hayomim in Eretz Yisrael. And he speaks about all these travesties, all these problems the Arabs are going to make dafka ba'achris hayomim, dafka before Mashiach comes. And one of them is yivnu binyan b'heichel. They're going to build a building over the side of the Heichel. Now, as you saw in that earlier picture, if we look at the buildings on the mountain now, there's only 2. There's the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is way too much to the south to possibly be the Kodesh Kodashim. That leaves one building left, and it's this one. Now, the Radvaz does deal with the question. The Gemara said it's 3 finger breadths above the ground. When we look at this rock, we can see that it's jutting out a lot more. He gives a very simple answer, which we know to be historically correct, and that is that there's been, over the centuries, a lot of digging, a lot of building destroying, not just Beis, but Yerushalayim as well, and the whole face of the ground has changed. So he says that in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, this rock jutted out only 3 etzbos, and by now it's jutting out a lot more. Why would it be jutting out a lot more? So he brings a story. He says that the Arabs know that the Kodesh Kodashim, that the Aron is buried beneath the Kodesh Kodashim. If you look in Gemara, it's actually a couple different opinions. One opinion is under the Kodesh Kodashim, another one is under the Lesches Ha'etzim, another one is it went to Bavel. But they accepted that it's under the in the place of the Kodesh Kodashim, deep in the ground. The Arabs want the Aron, and they started digging deep. And he brings a legend about how they actually dug very deep, and they sent someone down, and he was brought back up lifeless, and they gave up that idea. And he describes how you can see that they've been digging into this rock. What's interesting is if you look at this rock, you see that little circle over it. That's a bit of a skylight, that's stairs. And this is a room about 7 meters by 7 meters, which is not open to the Arab public. But if you're an Arab VIP, apparently you can get into this room. And this is considered a level holier. Now, why would there be a room in there? Why would they have dug a room into this rock? I can't tell you for sure, but the Radvaz writes that they were digging into this rock in order to find the Aron. Okay. Now, what's interesting is over the centuries, till recent times, to a Jew in Europe, the Dome of the Rock to him was the image of the Beis HaMikdash. That's why you see in books of early Jewish printing, at the very top you have, what we would expect. I was talking about before, having a picture of the Beis HaMikdash. They had a picture of the Dome of the Rock. Here we have pretty early Svarim. When I say early printed from the printing press, you see on each one, you see a Dome of the Rock. The middle one's actually very interesting. This is like within the first 50 years of Jewish printing, you had one of the printers in Venice, in Venezia, was Giustiniani. And he was actually a cutthroat competitor. He was like a real Italian mafianeer who was trying to get the other printers, Jewish printers, out of business. And he took this as his motive, as his logo for all of his works that he published. And he used the pasuk of God, that the glory of the latter house should be greater than the first house. It's a story, that's a pasuk which the Gemara applies to the second Beis HaMikdash, and it's above the Beis HaMikdash. What does he mean simplistically? When you look at simply, he's describing this is the Beis HaMikdash, and the glory of the second Beis HaMikdash is greater than the first. There are those who say that he was very cynically using this also to say that his printing press, that it should be a lot better than all of the other ones. This is a painting from back in 1819 when painters actually used to paint real scenes. There was no cameras, but very few cameras. And the Jews would gather, at that time they had permission to gather at this gate, which is the closest gate to the Dome of the Rock. And if you had a choice between going to the Kaisel, for example, or here, that's where Jews at that time went to pray. They went to daven because it was very widespread that this is the closest place to the actual Kodesh Kodashim. There's another very interesting fact. I did mention this in the Josephus Shiur, but it ties into this as well. Another interesting theory to support the idea that the Kodesh Kodashim is the Dome of the Rock. Around the Beis HaMikdash, you have an area which is known as the Chel, which I'll just use this. And the Chel was surrounded by a soreg, by a fence. Okay? Now, in the Chel, you had stairs. Now, I'm going to skip a little bit over just due to the time, just conscious of the time, about the fences, the signs. We discussed that with Josephus, when we did Josephus. But I want to focus. What we're looking at over here is a picture from an atlas that was made by an explorer, a British explorer called Charles Warren. In the 1800s, around 1850 or something, there was Queen Victoria sent a group of explorers to Eretz Yisrael, not just to Yerushalayim, but to go around Eretz Yisrael. And this was purely for religious reasons, to go and explore around Eretz Yisrael and see what's going on, and to understand more and more about what the Bible, about what Torah speaks about. And this Charles Warren is a big Chaverman because he came to the Turkish Pasha, and he had a letter from the Queen of England. Didn't let him read it exactly because he came and said that the Queen asked for more than she actually asked. The Pasha said, okay, but I need to accompany you wherever we go. So he said, no worries. When they went to their first shaft, they invited the Pasha to go in first. And as he's going down, they started shaking the ropes and everything. And he freaked out. They put him back to safety. And he said, you know what, you guys do this on your own. And they got free reign of the Har Beis. A lot of the knowledge we actually know that we don't have access to, we know from them. Now in his atlas, he drew over here, you can see stairs. And the problem is when, after the 6-Day War, when archaeologists started to focus on the Har Beis, we don't have any stairs there. Where does that come from? A while later, they realized that in the same collection, they had the latest technology, Charles Warren. They had taken photos. And here you see the Dome of the Rock. And over here, there are stairs that seem to lead to nowhere. They lead to nowhere. And you can sort of see that they're ancient stairs. They look very different to the stairs, which are a little bit to the left. And then it's no longer there. What does that mean? The Arabs have destroyed it. So we have stairs that lead to nowhere, and the Arabs have destroyed. What could these stairs be? If you're looking at the modern today, that's approximately where those stairs once were. What could that be? So there is a theory that these were the stairs of the Chel. And it would fit the opinion that says that the Dome of the Rock is the Kodesh Kodashim would roughly fit to say that that is the place of the Chel. So I find that to be a fascinating theory. I'm not saying that it's based necessarily on something in Halacha or in Sifrei Halacha, etc., but that is one approach. I'll skip the part about the signs. We did that in the past. And if we're going, therefore, to put that on a map, we'll start with a map I just pulled out from the Sefer that talks about this. So you see the general idea that you have a Beis Hamikdash superimposed on top of the Har Bayis, and where the Kodesh Kodashim is smack in the middle of the Dome of the Rock. Okay, so that is one shitta. And if we're going to make our own version, something like that. Obviously, give and take, we're just talking about approximately. There is another shitta, which is not brought in the works of early Achronim, but it does have a basis in halacha. We know the Gemara says that there were two parts of the Beis Hamikdash that were directly on the ground. What do I mean by that? Let's actually start the other way around. The entire Beis Hamikdash, we know that before they built the Beis Hamikdash, they took the Har Bayis and they built a structure which is known in the Gemara as kippin al gabi kippin, domes upon domes. I mentioned Charles Warren, by the way. If you read his book, he actually writes that we went underground and we saw vault after vault after vault, and he can't understand like how much treasures, water, and whatever reserves that the Jews have already. He writes he doesn't understand why there would have been so many vaults. Why did they have this? Mipnei oil atuma. The halacha is that any tumah which is buried in the ground, it goes up to the heavens. The only thing which is going to capture it is something that looks like that. It's going to get captured over there. The problem is, why is one row not good enough? Because if you have someone, a mace, for example, buried under one of the columns, I'll just start it again. So if you have a mace buried, for example, over here, it's going to go straight up that column. So you want to have at least a second level, which is going to prevent the tumah from going up. So as kippin al gabi kippin, we could imagine it was at least 2 layers. It might have been more depending on which part of the Har Bayis it was to make a level. The only exception was 2 places. One was the place of the Oren, and the other one was the place of the Mizbeach. Mizbeach Adama Tasali, you have to make a Mizbeach of Adama. So according to the Gemara says that the Mizbeach was not on top of kippin al gabi kippin. It was on top of the actual rock of the Har Bayis. So there are those who want to suggest then that the rock that we have under the Dome of the Rock is not actually the place of the Oren, but it is the place of the Mizbeach, and that's a place where it would be kept. Interesting, I just looked in, before Shabbos, I did a search in Eitzur Chachma for kippin in the Lubavitcher book section. I didn't really get anything besides in the Siddur. We say by... V'yitamrun b'goy kefin, we say it speaks about over there that all the clippers should be thrown into the hiding places in the tunnels. So again, we're talking about tunnels. Kefin means tunnels, domes. So we want the clippers to be thrown there. Then we have one other opinion, and due to the hour, I think we'll stop with this. We have the Arizal and the Maharsha. The Arizal and Maharsha do not discuss where the Beis Hamikdash is, but they do say some things which lead to a certain conclusion. The Maharsha brings the famous pasuk Tzion Sada Techaresh, that Tzion is going to be plowed like a field. One of the reasons it's famous is that's the famous story at the end of Makkos between Rabbi Akiva and the other Tanoim, that they were all crying and he laughed. And he said he was laughing because he saw that this nevuah was fulfilled, that Tzion is going to be plowed like a field. The Maharsha says that there is, in every cloud, there's a silver lining, and there's a bracha in that curse. And that is that Ein Ba Yishuv Akum, that until Mashiach comes, the place of the Beis Hamikdash will be like a plowed field. There will never be something for the goyim there. Rak kasada hacharusha ve'ena zruah. Rather, it's just going to be a place which is plowed and it's not planted. So I just brought a snippet, but if you look at the Maharsha expanding over there, the Maharsha says that in the place of the Beis Hamikdash, until Mashiach comes, it's just going to be like a plowed field. It's going to be desolate. There won't be a place for goyim either. There won't be a way for the goyim to overcome that. The Arizal didn't write any Svarim, but his students did, and the students of his students. And the Emek HaMelech, who's quoted quite often in Chassidus, brings from the Arizal that Makim Kodesh Panui B'loi Binyan, that the place of the Kodesh Kodashim is empty without any structure. And he says clearly without any structure. Maharsha Yukantaina is Yishuv, is a place to live, but he says without any structure. If we look at the Har Bayis, we know that there's the two structures, and the only place that you could fit a Beis HaMikdash is between the Dome of the Rock and between the Al-Aqsa Mosque over there. To put on the other side would be too far to the north, so presumably it would be around there, obviously very approximate. One of the advantages of that, one of the interesting things, if you accept this is directly behind the Kaisel. The Kaisel, if you can see, is right there, and this is the place over here. When I was preparing, I actually didn't want to include it when I prepared years ago. I was actually interested in that area. Unfortunately, I see that the only videos I could find is these Arab kids playing soccer in that area, or whatever the case is. But that is a third approach to where the place of the Beis HaMikdash is. Okay, there you go. You have another vision of it. You can see, yeah. Anyway, so that's, I guess we'll conclude here because the PowerPoint continues with each of the walls, which could take another hour. But again, as I started off saying, I hope the message we can take from here is something practical. The practical is, we mentioned earlier, the hishtoikikas, the yearning, the desire that the Beis HaMikdash